Welcome to Leviathan Rising. I'm so happy you're joining us for episode 2. The episodes in this series will hop around to different characters, and each character's story will likely be told out of order, taking place in different times within their own lives. So if you like a certain character, don't worry, they'll probably show back up again in a future episode. And if you want to follow news about the show, or just want to let me know what you think, please follow the Leviathan Rising social media accounts linked in the description, or you'll also see our email in there if you want to reach out to us with any suggestions. And lastly, if you like the show, give us 5 stars on your podcast app. That'll be a really big help for the show. Now, with no more ado, please enjoy Episode 2, Dear Evan Hansen. I'm Chris Wyden, and this is Leviathan Rising. Layla used to love show tunes. She used to gobble every new musical soundtrack, binge episodes of Glee when she was a teen, and of course, she loved a solo spastic dance around her room. It was never her favorite show, but Layla had a soft spot for Dear Evan Hansen. Or, more accurately, she used to have that soft spot. That had long since calloused over, and now she sat in near constant resentment for one of her favorite songs. Layla's eyes lazily rolled over the concrete room for the umpteenth time. Sincerely Me was playing again. Layla wasn't sure how many times she had heard the song today. She wasn't even sure what day it was. Layla winced as the leather straps binding her wrists rubbed against the sores underneath them. She pushed herself off the wall and laid down on the floor mat that had become her island home. The chains twinkled as she resettled. Luckily, if you can call it luck, her wrists were each independently chained to the same steel hook on the floor. This at least gave her the ability to use most of her range of motion. And at least the chains connected to leather binds. This was as opposed to metal handcuffs, she supposed. But in retrospect, Layla wasn't so sure the leather was preferable. She also hadn't anticipated that this would have lasted as long as it did. Fucking Matthew. She glared at his corpse. Rats had eaten most of his flesh, but for whatever reason, they left his already scarred face for the elements. When they started dating last year, Layla thought he'd make a good partner, but for the end times, he was shit at the job. Matthew had never been abusive, albeit a little mean at times, but Layla never dreamt he'd do something like this to her. When he had tied her up, he claimed it was for her protection. Layla knew their world was effectively ending, just like everyone else, and she was not at all convinced that this would help. And it did not. When Matthew first suggested that he tie her up, he used a casual tone that someone might use to ask if you want eggs for breakfast. Layla had never been confrontational, but she reacted as most would to such a proposition, with a forceful no. Why would Matthew think imprisoning her would make her any safer? She had asked. But this line of questioning proved to be futile. Matthew's opinion was that if Layla stayed in the house, nothing bad could happen to her. Of course, this was wrong for a number of reasons. At the time, Layla angrily countered with only one reason, that locking her in a room was, in fact, a bad thing happening to her. This bald-faced reality proved to be too much for Matthew to handle, and so he chose to exercise his proposal immediately. Layla got a good few swipes in, but Matthew was 6'5". He had evidently planned for resistance, and after a minute-long struggle, he managed to cover Layla's mouth with a formaldehyde-soaked rag. Layla supposed this was because the moron couldn't figure out how to get chloroform. The formaldehyde didn't knock her unconscious, but the shock of chemicals in her respiratory system stunned her long enough for Matthew to bind her wrists with a zip tie from his pants pocket. And then, within a week of locking her in the basement, Matthew got himself shot trying to liberate the last box of Lucky Charms from Safeway. Somehow, he made it back to the house, but he was already half dead when he got there. Layla was even relieved when the basement door opened that day. She could have used some cereal herself. But that relief only lasted a moment. Matthew was delirious from losing so much blood, and the steep basement stairs were treacherous in his state. Layla heard the door open moments before the loud sequence of thuds that ended with Matthew's body face down at the bottom of the stairs. But he didn't even have the self-respect to turn away before landing, and as a result, his face now lay turned toward her, cheeks smushing his lips into a pursed shape and eyes wide with surprise. He looked like he had died mid-chew. Looked like it might have been something delicious. Layla hadn't eaten in 4 days now, but the universe isn't without a sense of humor. A leak had started from somewhere right to the left of where Layla sat against the wall. It was nothing but annoying when she slept, but consistent access to water was keeping her alive. It started 2 days ago, and it must have been a leaky pipe because Layla didn't hear any rain. It never quickened or slowed. She was barely able to reach an old bucket from under the stairwell, but now it collected her drinking water. Despite the seeming hopelessness of her situation, Layla was enlivened by this small victory. She felt like one of those lone mountain climbers who get their hand caught in a rock and have to eat their own arm off to survive and get free. Layla wasn't sure if she was eat-a-limb desperate yet, but she would see. On day 5, Matthew's face started to slip from his skull. His eyes clouded over, and his features began to resemble the clay-made monstrosities from the original Spy Kids movie. Bummer, thought Layla. I was still deciding if I was going to eat that. That's when the front door banged open upstairs. Layla froze. The basement door was still open from when Matthew took his final ride, but she didn't yell out. She moved to the bottom of the stairs, lifting her chains so they didn't rattle on the cement floor. It sounded like 2 people. They moved across the floor above her slowly. They were in the living room. One spoke to the other quietly. The voice was definitely a woman's, but Layla wasn't sure how young or old. The vibrations of her footsteps thudded gently on the floorboards above Layla. She tracked their movements from the living room and into the kitchen. If they made it over the mudroom, they would find the basement door. Layla had a decision to make. She could call out, but who knows what would happen. But if she remained silent and the visitors didn't explore past the kitchen, she would still be starving and restrained. Hello? Layla was surprised at her own voice. She sounded like a frog at the tail end of puberty. She realized she hadn't spoken out loud in days. Layla cleared her throat as the footsteps above moved with more purpose. Another voice, different from the first, responded. Hello? Is someone here? Down here! Layla called, pressing the balls of her feet into the cold floor, as if that would better propel her voice through the floorboards above. She heard footsteps converge in the kitchen, and then make their way to the top of the basement stairs. Oh, Jesus, fuck! That's when Layla remembered Matthew's rotting body was probably visible in all of its splendor from the top of the stairs. Past the point of fucks to give, Layla snorted lightly with amusement at Matthew's slipping face. It's okay, he's harmless. Well, he is now, at least. The cement steps buzzed quietly with the friction of sneakers. 2 sets of legs appeared on the stairs, and Layla got to her feet. 2 women. First in full view was a petite blonde woman, who looked like the intense soccer mom that never forgot orange slices and with whom no one dared fuck around. The other woman was tall with brown hair, and her age was an unknown for Layla. At first she looked to be about 50, but she seemed to grow younger as she got closer. When the blonde woman reached the bottom of the steps, she paused, looking at the mammoth corpse before her. She looked to Layla, who raised her hands in greeting, chains tinkling at the movement. Fuck me sideways, she said, looking at Layla the way one looks at a 3-legged kitten. Then Blondie suspended her foot over the basement floor and lowered it point first as if she were about to test the water's temperature. The foot landed on the cement like a dreidel that twisted the rest of her body smoothly around, and then, to Layla's surprise, the woman launched herself from that pointed foot in a smooth arc over Matthew's body, landing with a sticky, flat noise. Ew, oh. Blondie's face scrunched up with disgust as she looked down to see the dried puddle of blood on which she had landed. Then she cocked her head up with nearly mechanical cheer toward Layla. "I'm Bethany." Layla stared at her. "Hi. I'm Layla." "Well, hello there, Layla. Let's get you the hell out of here." Bethany approached while digging in her pocket. She stopped right in front of Layla, retrieving a surprisingly high-quality pocket knife. She started to work at slicing through the leather bindings that connected Layla's hands to the chains. Meanwhile, the other woman had made her way past Matthew and next to Bethany with a complete lack of fanfare. Layla was even a little startled when she suddenly appeared over Bethany's shoulder. Layla nodded, making eye contact with her. "I'm Ollie," she said flatly. "And there we go." The bindings fell from Layla's wrists. She rubbed her sores and sighed gently. After a moment, she looked up at her saviors. Layla's newfound freedom seemed to bring with it all the social mores and instincts that one does not enjoy in prison. Here were two lovely people in her home, and she had yet to offer them anything. Layla felt stupid for the thought, but despite the reality, she still felt a little embarrassed. Bethany and Ollie were taking in the basement that had been Layla's home for the past few weeks. Ollie looked at Layla. "Do you know what's happening out there?" Ollie and Bethany unshackled Layla. They clothed her as if it was their home in which they had discovered Layla. Ollie found some of Layla's old Chef Boyardees and heated the chef's creation on Layla's gas-powered stove. Layla finally felt human again. After Matthew had been dead for 3 days, Layla had given up on the notion of her survival, and with it the idea that she'd ever be comfortable or eat a warm meal again. In my own basement, no less, she thought. Ollie patted Layla's shoulder. "Ready to go? Everyone's getting together at the Royals bar tonight." Layla stood. She quietly retrieved her coat from the closet and turned to Bethany and Ollie. This was surreal. Bethany looked confused, but also saddened somehow. "Okay, let's go." The streets were buzzing with a new activity outside. At first, Layla found this concerning. Her shoulders remained forward and tense until they walked a few blocks. As she looked around, Layla found her city suburb alive on the streets in a way it had never been before. People were all over the blacktop and sidewalks. No cars roamed the streets at all. There was only one in sight, and it was parked in the middle of the road with all 4 doors open. An egg-white Cadillac. Sam Cooke floated into the street from the car's radio. People sat in their yards, started little campfires with neighbors in their driveways, and children darted around laughing in the twilight. Candles lined the ground every few feet in the absence of working street lamps. It felt festive. Ollie looked at Layla. She smiled. "It's been like this for a few weeks now." Layla turned to Ollie. "How is that possible? Do people not have jobs anymore?" "There were aurora borealis in the sky here for an entire night," Bethany said. "Everything lost power, not just the grid, but cars, phones, all of it." "Some people have managed to get electrical batteries working again for some things," said Ollie, gesturing to the Cadillac, now behind them in the street. "But for the most part, no one knows what happened or why." Bethany piped up. "I heard someone say a sunspot might have caused it. But whatever happened, it's like the world stopped, and we're all about it around here." "I don't think it was a sunspot," Ollie said quietly. Layla said nothing. She let this news absorb slowly. The 3 women continued down the street in comfortable silence. A few insects started to buzz as their night shift began. Children giggled in the distance. And for the first time in a long time, especially now with Bethany and Ollie, she felt like she was safe. And then Layla looked up. She had never seen so many stars. Thank you for listening to Leviathan Rising. If you're enjoying the show, please rate us on your podcast app. It's a huge help. To keep up with us online, our social media accounts are linked in the episode description. If you want to send us a note, our email is in there too. Leviathan Rising is created by Chris Wyden. Music is composed and produced by Travis Paul.